Greetings, health practitioners, and all those interested in health. I'm Chris, and I'm a retired medical specialist with 40 years experience in most areas of health. I say in all of these videos, if you have any concerns about your medical treatment or diagnoses, raise them with your favourite health practitioner. These videos are inspired by the works of Professor Buckmeister and Harris, who've written a book called Hippocrasy, How Doctors Are Not Practicing According to Their Oath. And they demonstrate many problems in medicine, including doctors carrying out unnecessary operations and unnecessary tests and examinations. The authors refer to the conditions autism and ADHD, or attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity. These two conditions do not appear on any medical tests or investigations. No brain scan or other test will demonstrate them. So how do we know they even exist? To make matters worse, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the United States, Volume 5, has evolved the condition autistic spectrum disorder. Autistic spectrum disorder was cobbled from a number of diagnoses which were associated with autistic behaviour, including Asperger's syndrome, which is no longer used, named after its discoverer Asperger. Having said that, there is a group of children who are genuinely autistic. They exhibit symptoms of extreme social withdrawal, odd, stereotyped behaviours, in most instances, intellectual handicap. Similarly, there are those children who exhibit extremes of hyperactivity. These are the children, when they came to my office, who would have demolished the office after 5 minutes. But yet now we have 45-year-old men appearing in the newspaper claiming that they've suddenly realised at that stage in their life that the reason they weren't making any progress in life was because they had a diagnosis of hyperactivity disorder. And also, we see more and more newspaper articles of young women who claim that there is an epidemic of autistic spectrum disorder. Often, when these children were brought to my office, the mothers would tell me that they had a diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder. But when I examined these children, I could find nothing wrong with them. Their behaviour seemed to be quite normal. They sat quietly and they were very friendly. I became very, very concerned at this, and I began to realise that this diagnosis was being applied to a lot of children who were exhibiting behavioural and learning problems and really didn't have a mental disorder at all. They also came from homes where parents had separated, or where the parents were working extremely long hours and the children were feeling rebellious and sad. And yet their behaviour was being interpreted as some form of disability. There are people who are making money on this condition, and we'll talk about those later. But to understand this condition more, let's look back in the history of medicine. Our authors recall the existence of a condition called repetitive strain injury, or RSI. This was a condition that emerged in the 80s, where people presented with sore hands and wrists, and nothing was evident on physical examination, tests or scans. Often these were associated with claims for workers' compensation, and initially they were thought to be associated with excessive use of computers, workplace stress, a variety of other things. They were said to have occurred in epidemic proportions. Now take careful note of that word. Eventually it was discovered that the condition emanated from overdiagnosis by doctors who were reporting on this condition to organisations like Workers' Compensation and writing reports on it and overdiagnosing it. Eventually, with time, the condition began to disappear. Fast forward to now. Now we have another condition or a set of conditions for which there is no medical test or examination that demonstrates it. We don't know what area of the brain is involved, and it's said to occur in epidemic proportions. But as I noted earlier, when newspaper articles were saying that young women were showing features of autistic spectrum disorder in epidemic proportions, epidemic only refers to infectious diseases, and surely no one could be proposing that autistic spectrum disorder could be caught by touching somebody else. Who's making money from this condition? That's where we should look. Reports done by medical people and psychologists, sometimes in the thousands of dollars, are diagnosing this condition. Psychologists claim that they can diagnose it, but when you look closely, their tests consist of little more than a set of preformed responses. Schools benefit because the more children they have on their books who have these disabilities, the more government funding they achieve. A local school has approximately 600 children, has over 100 students with diagnoses of this type, almost 1/5 of the school population, including one child who has more than 5, a statistical impossibility. Parents are also benefiting from this because their children are given more time to hand in assignments and adjustments are made in those assignments. They're also given more time to do examinations. So everyone is in on this scam. Of great concern recently was an article in the newspapers where psychologists claim that they could predict with 95% accuracy a test given at 18 months of age that would diagnose autistic spectrum disorder, which usually emerges at age 4. No other medical test has this level of accuracy. What's worse, if you look at this test closely, and it's called the SACS preschool test, a lot of it's subjective and it can be given by untrained personnel. This is extremely dangerous. Prediction. I predict that autistic spectrum disorder will follow RSI into the dustbin of history. This will be strongly resisted by vested interests such as parents, schools and psychologists who benefit financially.